Daniel Hayes stood on the threshold of his own dream, unable to tear his gaze from the numbers on the doorframe. Apartment 142, 14th floor, 775 square feet of flawless, hard-won space. The keys in his palm felt heavy, like a medal earned through 10 years of unrelenting work. Beside him, Claire held their 6-year-old daughter Mia close, based watching him with identical expressions of eager anticipation. He turned the key, and the door swung open, and midday sunlight struck their faces, transforming the dust motes hanging in the air into a golden swarm. The smell. That was the first thing that seared into consciousness, the smell. Fresh paint, laminate flooring with that electric scent like the air after a thunderstorm, and the faint aroma of new plastic from the window frames. Daniel inhaled this cocktail and felt a strange, almost childlike satisfaction. It smelled like a clean slate, a system without bugs, a space where every element was in its proper place, obeyed the rules, functioned exactly as intended. Claire, laughing, released Mia and stepped into the empty living room. Her chestnut hair lifted in the breeze from the open windows, and her long terracotta skirt swirled around her legs. "Honey, careful. The floor is not completely," Daniel began. But his wife was already spinning in the middle of the room, head thrown back, arms spread wide. Mia, shrieking with delight, bolted deeper into the apartment. The patter of small feet echoed hollowly across the bare laminate. Daniel remained in the doorway, watching this chaos of joy, and a restrained smile touched his lips. He never allowed himself such open displays of emotion. But now, in this moment, he was happy. Genuinely, measurably happy. He set down a box of electronics and walked to the panoramic window in the living room. The city sprawled below, reduced by distance to the scale of an architectural model. The 14th floor gave him the sense of control, of power over the chaos of the streets. From here, traffic jams looked like orderly data streams, people like pixels on a screen. Everything was distant, safe, manageable. Daniel ran his palm along the perfectly smooth wall in that complex gray shade Claire called misty morning. The plaster was cool and even, like the screen of a powered-down monitor. "Dad! Dad, come here!" Mia's voice carried from the far room. Her room. Daniel walked down the hallway, passing the empty kitchen where a white glossy cabinet set already stood, assembled by him personally according to the instructions. The door to the nursery stood wide open. Mia stood in the center of the room with its peach-colored walls, arms wrapped around herself, spinning in place. Her large, gray-green eyes were shining. In the corner by the window stood a house-shaped bed with a canopy of light tulle. On the windowsill, Claire had already arranged 3 pots of succulents. "Is this my room? All mine?" Mia asked, and her voice held reverence. Daniel crouched down before his daughter, so their eyes were level. He was not a man of sentimental speeches, but now the words came naturally. "All yours, sweetheart. This is where you'll grow, learn, dream. Nothing here will hurt you." The girl threw herself around his neck, and he caught her, pulling her close. Fragile body, smell of children's shampoo, trust in every movement. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. There it was, the goal of all his algorithms. Family, safety, order. Claire appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame and watching them with a soft smile. Sunlight fell across her face, and golden sparks danced in her green eyes. Daniel met her gaze over Mia's head. Between them ran that invisible thread of understanding that needed no words. We did this. Weir's here. This is ours." His wife nodded as if reading his thoughts, and her hand instinctively touched the silver bracelet on her wrist. That same one, the gift when Mia was born. By evening, the apartment began to accumulate the artifacts of their lives. Daniel methodically unpacked boxes, sorting contents according to a prearranged plan. Books onto the living room shelves, strictly by height. Dishes into kitchen cabinets, front-facing. Tech cables into special cable channels so nothing protruded, nothing disrupted the visual purity of the space. Claire, in her manner of creative chaos, hung photographs and posters on the walls, periodically stepping back a few paces to evaluate the composition. Mia dragged toys into her room, arranging them in rows according to some logic only she understood. Daniel pulled a smart speaker from a box, a sleek black cylinder with blue accent lighting, and positioned it on a shelf in the living room. Connected it to Wi-Fi, configured the lighting integration, ran a test launch. All systems operating nominally. "Alexa, turn on the living room lights," he said aloud. The LED strip under the ceiling smoothly illuminated, flooding the room with soft, warm light. Mia gasped and clapped her hands. Claire laughed. Daniel allowed himself a satisfied smile. In this moment, he was not simply the owner of an apartment. He was a creator, the architect of his own world, where every variable yielded to control, where every query had a predictable response. 3 weeks flew by in the routine of settling in. Daniel returned to his usual schedule. Up at 7, breakfast, commute to work, 8 hours immersed in code, return home. The apartment grew cozy. Claire filled the windowsills with greenery, ferns, ivy, fiddle-leaf figs, transforming each window into a small oasis. The kitchen filled with the smell of fresh baking. Mia started pre-K, and every evening buried him in stories about new friends and her teacher, Miss Carlson. Life flowed according to laws Daniel understood and approved. One evening, he sat at his desk in the improvised office, a partitioned corner of the living room where 2 monitors stood alongside an ergonomic chair and a shelf of technical literature. He was dissecting the architecture of a new banking system his team was scheduled to launch in a month. Code unfurled across the screen in orderly lines, logical, sequential. Daniel had submerged himself in this flow so deeply that he did not immediately hear his wife's voice. "Dan, come here!" Alarm threaded through Claire's tone. Daniel raised his head, blinked, returning to physical reality. The voice came from Mia's room. He stood and walked down the hallway. The nursery door stood open. Claire was standing beside the bed, holding a child's drawing, a bright yellow sun over a crooked little house, and staring at the wall above the headboard. Her face was taut with tension. Daniel moved closer and followed the direction of her gaze. On the peach-colored wall, running down from the ceiling molding, stretched a thin, dark line. Barely visible, like a needle scratch, it scored the perfect surface with a vertical incision. Length about 8 inches. Daniel squinted, leaned closer, ran his fingertips along the defect. The plaster was intact. The crack did not penetrate into the wall. This was purely a surface rupture. "It's normal settling for a new building," he said, straightening. His voice sounded calm, rational. "The structure is settling. Materials are adjusting. Standard process. I'll call the property management. Do not worry." Claire turned toward him. In her green eyes swam a fear disproportionate to the scale of the problem. This was one aspect of her nature that simultaneously endeared and irritated Daniel. The ability to see catastrophe where there was simply a minor glitch. "It's over Mia's bed," she said quietly, "right above her head." Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder, a calming gesture refined through many years. "Honey, a hairline crack in the plaster presents no danger whatsoever. I'll review the building codes, contact management, and I'll send a repairman. Everything will be fixed according to protocol." She nodded, but the tension did not leave her face. Daniel turned and left the room. Mentally, he was already formulating an action plan. Step 1. Contact property management. Step 2. Document the defect. Step 3. Secure warranty repair. Simple linear algorithm. No reason for concern. The next day, during lunch break, Daniel sat at his desk in the office. Around him boiled the familiar cacophony of the open workspace. Clatter of keyboards, fragments of conversations, hum of air conditioning. He opened the property management contacts on his smartphone, Horizon Property Services, and dialed the number. Long rings. Finally, a click, and a woman's voice came through the line, monotone, like synthesized speech. "Horizon Property Services, how can I help you?" Daniel straightened in his chair, composing himself. He spoke clearly, businesslike, operating with specific data. "Good afternoon. Daniel Hayes, owner of apartment 142, Horizon Towers, Building 3. Service contract number HS347. I've discovered a defect in the finishing, requesting warranty inspection." A pause. From the other end of the line came a sound resembling a poorly concealed yawn. "Uh-huh. And what specifically?" The voice lost even the pretense of interest. Daniel clenched his jaw, suppressed a flash of irritation, continued the protocol. Crack in the wall of the child's bedroom. Vertical, running down from the ceiling molding, approximately 8 inches in length. Appeared within 3 weeks of move-in. "Yeah, got your request," the woman drawled. The sound of keystrokes followed. "Technician will come by within a week. Expect a call." No day specified, no time specified. Daniel opened his mouth to request specifics, but the line was already emitting short beeps. She'd hung up. He slowly lowered the phone to the desk and stared at the dark screen. The first contact with the service system had been sloppy, ineffective, a program with a bad interface, a protocol that did not work the way it should. That evening, Daniel returned home and found Claire in the kitchen. She was chopping vegetables for salad, but her hand movements were mechanical, detached. Mia sat in the living room on the carpet, building a tower from Lego blocks. The girl coughed, short, dry, and returned to her play. Daniel hung his jacket on the rack, removed his shoes, walked into the kitchen. "I called management. They promised to send someone within a week," he reported. Claire nodded without raising her eyes from the cutting board. The knife struck the wood rhythmically, almost aggressively. Daniel moved closer, looked at her face. Something wrong? She stopped. She put down the knife. She turned toward him, and he saw the redness around her eyes. "Mia's been coughing. 3 days now. Dry cough, especially at night. I called the pediatrician. She came today." Daniel frowned. Coughing. He heard it now from the living room, sharp, scraping sound. Mia coughed again, and the sound pierced something inside him, bypassing logic and striking directly at instinct. "What did the doctor say?" he asked. Claire ran a palm across her face, wearily. Adjusting to pre-K, viral load. She prescribed syrup and nebulizer treatments. "But, Dan," she paused, choosing her words. "I think it's the air in her room. Ever since that crack appeared, there's been this musty smell in there. Dust. I bought a humidifier, but it's not helping." Daniel shook his head. This was an irrational leap, correlation being mistaken for causation. Claire, A hairline crack in a plaster cannot affect air quality. That's medically impossible. The doctor made her diagnosis. We do not need to connect dots that are not there. Her face contorted. Green eyes flashed. Do not give me that logic. I'm her mother. I can feel when something's wrong with my child. I'm not disputing your feelings. I'm just saying we need to stick to the facts. Mia picked up a virus at school. That's normal. We're treating her according to the doctor's orders. In parallel, I'm handling the crack issue. Two independent processes. Claire turned back to the vegetables, but resentment was readable in the line of her shoulders. Daniel stood there another moment, then left the kitchen. Logic was on his side, he knew that, but somehow that knowledge brought no relief. A week passed. No repairman appeared. Daniel called management 3 times. Each time they promised to resubmit the request, expedite the process, definitely be in touch shortly. Each time these were empty words, vanishing into nowhere. On the 8th day of waiting, an email arrived. Horizon Property Services logo in the header, official tone. Daniel opened the attachment and began to read. Dear Mr. Hayes, in accordance with Section 347 of the International Building Code and Technical Regulations on Building Safety, hairline settlement cracks measuring less than 0.3 millimeters in width do not constitute a construction defect, pose no threat to structural integrity, and are not subject to warranty repair. Your request has been closed. Respectfully, Facilities Management. Daniel reread the text twice. Every word struck him like a fist. His problem had been nullified, hidden behind a paragraph of regulations. The system designed to help had failed. More than that, it had declared his complaint invalid. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the office ceiling. Anger began to rise slowly from somewhere in his solar plexus, hot and unfamiliar. He was not accustomed to anger. Anger was an irrational emotion, an impediment to decision-making. But now anger flooded him like boiling water. He closed the email, created a new folder on his desktop, named it Issue, Wall Apartment 142. Opened a text document and began structuring information. Date of first discovery, date of management contact, contents of conversations, text of the dismissal. He worked methodically, like a systems analyst before a program crash, collecting logs, recording the sequence of events. If the system would not work by its stated rules, he would find a workaround. He would prove them wrong. That evening, returning home, Daniel silently entered Mia's room. The girl slept clutching her stuffed fox, Cooper. Her breathing was uneven, interrupted. Daniel pulled out his smartphone, activated the camera, photographed the crack, placing a ruler against the wall for scale. Then extracted from his pocket a small digital hygrometer purchased that afternoon at a hardware store. Mounted it on the wall. Recorded the humidity reading, 68%. Opened Excel on his phone, created a spreadsheet. Began daily monitoring. Data. He needed data. Irrefutable, documented evidence. Another week passed. The folder Issue, Wall Apart 142 swelled. Photographs with dates. Spreadsheet with humidity readings. Scanned apartment documents. Contract with property management. That same dismissal letter, printed and filed. Daniel worked on this dossier every evening, immersing himself in the process with the same obsession he brought to debugging complex code. He was no longer a supplicant. He was an investigator. He would prove the system's error. Claire watched his actions with a mixture of hope and growing despair. Mia continued coughing. The syrup was not helping. Nights, Claire sat by her daughter's bed, stroking her back while the girl choked on dry spasms. Each night the cough grew louder, more insistent, as if the building itself was forcing air from the child's lungs. Daniel heard it through the wall, heard it and tried not to think, focused on facts, on the next step in the algorithm. The next step was the development company. Keystone Construction, a name printed in gold letters on the promotional brochure Daniel had received 3 years ago at the residential complex presentation. He found their contact information in the purchase agreement, dialed the number. Long rings. Voicemail. This number is no longer in service. Second number. Same story. Third. Daniel opened the browser on his computer, typed in Keystone Construction News. First link, an article on the local news portal, dated 2 months prior. Headline: Horizon Towers developer files for bankruptcy. Daniel clicked, read, then read again, slower, absorbing every word. Keystone Construction had declared insolvency. Liquidation committee appointed. Assets being sold off. Office closed. Phones disconnected. The ground vanished beneath his feet. Daniel stared at the screen, feeling a strange emptiness in his chest. The primary party responsible for their building had evaporated, dissolved into legal formulations. This was not mere negligence. This looked like planned escape. Built, sold, fled, leaving buyers alone with the defects. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes. The system was failing at every level. Each successive tier proved just as unreliable as the one before. One last recourse remained. District administration. Daniel spent 3 days calling different departments, fighting through secretaries and automated systems. Finally, they connected him to the office of the head of the building and planning department, Richard Morrison. Office hours Tuesdays and Thursdays, 2 to 5 p.m., strictly by appointment. Daniel scheduled the nearest Thursday. Gathered all his materials into a black binder, printed photographs of the crack, prepared a concise summary of the problem on a single sheet, structured his argument. Thursday arrived gray and windy. Daniel took time off work, put on a suit, a rare choice for him, but the meeting demanded formality. Got in his car and drove downtown. The district administration building rose in the historic quarter, monumental, built in the mid-century modern style. Heavy columns, broad steps, and massive doors. Daniel climbed to the 3rd floor on echoing marble stairs, found the correct office. Knocked. Entered. Morrison's office was vast and nearly empty. A massive desk of polished dark wood stood against the far wall, separating the bureaucrat from the world. Behind the desk sat a man in his 50s, wearing an impeccably pressed shirt and burgundy tie. Graying hair slicked smoothly back, face without a trace of emotion. He nodded to Daniel, indicating the chair before the desk. Daniel sat. The chair was hard, low. He felt like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. "I'm listening," Morrison said without lifting his gaze from the computer monitor. Daniel opened his binder, pulled out photographs, arranged them in a fan across the desk. Close-up of the crack with ruler for scale. Wide shot of the nursery wall. The hole from a recently fallen chunk of plaster. That had happened 2 days ago, and Claire had sobbed for half an hour while he photographed the evidence. "Mr. Morrison, my name is Daniel Hayes. I own an apartment in Horizon Towers. A serious construction defect has been discovered in the unit, a crack in a load-bearing wall. Property management refuses to acknowledge the problem. The developer has filed bankruptcy. I need the administration's help arranging an independent inspection." Morrison slowly shifted his gaze from the monitor to the photographs. Picked one up, looked at it, put it back. His face remained absolutely impassive. "Did you file an official complaint with management?" he asked monotonously. "Yes." Received written denial. Daniel extracted the printout, slid it across the desk. Morrison did not even pick it up, just glanced at it. "Without an official finding from an independent inspection committee, there's nothing we can do for you. This is a private matter, a private dispute between you and the service organization. Take it to court." Daniel felt something constrict inside him. He leaned forward, trying to catch Morrison's eye. "Mr. Morrison, this is about a child's safety. My 6-year-old daughter, she sleeps under that crack. She's started having breathing problems." "I understand your concern," Morrison replied, and his voice held not a drop of understanding. "But the administration has no authority to intervene in private disputes without expert findings. Hire an independent inspector, obtain a report, then come back." He had already turned back to his monitor. Meeting concluded. Daniel slowly gathered the photographs back into the binder, stood, exited the office, closed the door behind him. Stood in the hallway, staring at the wall covered in cheap plastic paneling. For the first time in his life, he had encountered a system that could neither be debugged nor hacked. A system that simply refused to work. He descended the stairs, walked outside. Cold wind struck his face. He walked toward his car, feeling a strange heaviness in his chest, as if someone had placed a brick there. All his algorithms had failed. All protocols had malfunctioned. Management had brushed him off. The developer had fled. The bureaucrat had refused. What now? Where now? Daniel got in the car, placed the binder on the passenger seat, and stared through the windshield. There was no answer. At home, Claire met him in the hallway. Her eyes were red. She waited for him to speak. Daniel shook his head. "Denied. Need an independent inspection. At our expense." His wife's face contorted. She turned and walked into the kitchen without a word. Daniel went into Mia's room. The girl slept, clutching Cooper. He sat on the edge of the bed, looked at the wall. The crack was no longer a hairline. It had spread like a black vein from ceiling downward, nearly to the middle of the wall. From the main fracture radiated smaller branches, like roots of a dead tree. Paint around it had bubbled. Daniel reached out, touched the surface. The plaster was damp and soft, like rotting flesh. That night a storm struck the city. The sky opened. Rain hammered the roofs. Wind howled through window cracks. Thunder crashed so violently the glass trembled in its frames. Daniel and Claire lay in bed, sleepless. From the next room came Mia's dry, scraping cough, punctuated by thunder rolls. Claire breathed unevenly. Daniel stared into the darkness of the ceiling, running through options in his mind. Inspection would cost money, serious money. Then court, even more money, and time. But the crack was growing now. Mia was coughing now. Suddenly, cutting through the storm outside, a sound came from the nursery. Muffled, heavy, organic. Not a crash, not a clatter. The sound of something broken, collapsed. The sound pierced Daniel with icy shock. He tore from the bed before thought could form, lunged for the door, burst into Mia's room, stumbling over the threshold, switched on the light. A cloud of white, chalky dust was slowly settling through the air. It hung in the glow of the nightlight like a ghost, smelled of dampness, mold, decay. On the floor, 4 inches from Mia's head, lay a ragged chunk of plaster the size of a dinner plate. several smaller fragments scattered around it. On the sheet, on the pillow, white dust. Mia slept clutching Cooper, undisturbed by the noise. But she might not have been sleeping. She might have been lying there with open eyes, and then that chunk would have fallen onto her face. Daniel did not remember reaching the bed. His hands moved independently. He snatched his daughter from beneath the blanket, pulled her against him, breathing hard. The small body went limp in his embrace. The girl moaned in her sleep. Daniel checked her with his hands, head, shoulders, back. Was she intact? Was she injured? His fingers trembled. All his analytical mind, all logic evaporated. Only fear remained, primal and all-consuming. His home had attacked his daughter. His perfectly engineered system had tried to kill her. Claire ran in after him, stumbled over the fragments, grabbed the doorframe, saw Daniel holding Mia, saw the hole in the wall. Made a sound like a sob and moan combined. Daniel handed her their daughter. Mia woke, began crying, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. Claire pressed her close, stroked her hair, and whispered something soothing. Daniel stood in the middle of the room, staring at the wall. The hole gaped like a black wound. Torn edges of plaster protruded from it, exposing what lay inside. Daniel slowly moved closer, pulled out his phone, activated the flashlight, aimed the beam into the cavity, and froze. He had expected to see the smooth gray surface of poured concrete panel. That's what had been promised in the promotional brochure. That's what was written in the apartment's technical specifications. Steel frame concrete construction. Load-bearing walls, reinforced concrete grade 4,000 psi. Instead, the flashlight beam pulled from the darkness a nightmare. Crooked, careless brickwork of red clay brick. Mismatched, broken, as if salvaged from a demolition site. Bricks laid unevenly, with gaps. Between them, dark, damp mortar that crumbled at a touch. Daniel extended a finger and made contact. The mortar smeared like wet clay. He stood there illuminating the scene, and a thought flared in his mind with deafening clarity. A single thought, irrefutable. This was not settling. This was not negligence. This was fraud. Deliberate, monstrous, criminal. His home was built from lies. Morning arrived with the cruel inevitability of a verdict. Daniel had not slept. He sat on the edge of the bed in the bedroom, staring at the floor, listening to sounds coming from other rooms. Creak of a closet, rustle of fabric. Claire was packing. Mia slept in their bed, clutching Cooper. The girl had not returned to her own room after the night's collapse. Daniel raised his eyes to his wife. Claire stood with her back to him, folding children's dresses into a travel bag. Her face was gray, haggard, movements mechanical, detached. She said nothing. This silence pressed harder than any scream. Daniel stood, walked toward her, opened his mouth to say something, propose a plan, explain the next step, convince her to stay. But Claire stopped him with a single gesture, raised her palm without turning around, froze in place. "I'm taking Mia to my mother's," she said. Her voice sounded flat, lifeless. Worse than hysteria, worse than accusations. This was a verdict. Daniel took a step closer. "Claire, we need to stay together, especially now. I'll find a solution. She whirled around sharply. Green eyes had darkened almost to black. On her face settled a cold fury he had never seen before. Your perfectly debugged world just nearly killed our child. Each word struck like a blow. I'm not waiting for a second time. Daniel stepped back. Something inside him snapped. He wanted to argue, present counter-arguments, prove his case. But no words came. Because she was right. Before leaving, Claire insisted on a visit to the pediatrician. Daniel drove in silence. Mia sat in back, clutching her fox. Coughed every few minutes, short, dry, wrenching. That sound had become the soundtrack of their recent weeks. The clinic was located downtown in an old brick building with peeling facade. They climbed to the 3rd floor up a narrow staircase smelling of bleach. The pediatrician's office was sterile white and cold. Behind the desk sat an elderly woman with reading glasses on a chain. The doctor asked Mia to undress to her undershirt and listened to her lungs for a long time with a stethoscope. Mia sat on Claire's lap, watching the doctor fearfully, coughed again. The doctor frowned, continuing to listen. "Where do you live?" she asked, without raising her eyes. "Recent renovation? Apartment damp." Claire explained haltingly about the crack, about plaster crumbling, about the musty smell in the nursery, about how the cough began simultaneously with the defect's appearance. The doctor listened, nodding. Her face grew increasingly grim. "The symptoms are very concerning," she finally said, setting down the stethoscope. "If the child continues to stay in an environment with a chronic irritant source, whether mold or construction dust, there's high risk of developing bronchial asthma." The word asthma dropped into the office silence like a stone into a well. Daniel heard Claire inhale sharply, painfully. Mia pressed closer to her mother. "Asthma?" Claire repeated, and her voice trembled. The doctor looked at her over the glasses. The gaze was sympathetic but firm. "The child needs immediate isolation from the irritant source. The change of residence until the problem is eliminated. Otherwise, the consequences could be irreversible." Daniel stood by the wall, feeling the last support structure inside him collapse. He had failed his family. His system had suffered critical failure, and the cost of this failure was measured in his daughter's health. After seeing Claire and Mia to the train, Daniel returned to the apartment alone. The drive to the station passed in silence. On the platform, Mia hugged his neck, whispering, "Daddy, will you fix the wall?" He nodded, unable to speak a word. Claire did not look at him. She took their daughter's hand and stepped into the car. The door closed, and the train pulled away. The apartment greeted him with deafening silence. Daniel closed the front door and froze in the entryway, listening to emptiness. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock. Nothing else. He walked down the hallway, looked into the living room. Couch pillows neatly arranged. On the floor, a forgotten Lego brick. He picked it up, squeezed it in his palm. The door to Mia's room stood ajar. Daniel entered. On the floor still lay a pile of gray debris, plaster fragments, chalky dust. The hole in the wall gaped like a black wound. From it emanated cold and dampness. On the round rug shaped like a moon lay the stuffed fox, Cooper. Mia had forgotten him. Daniel picked up the toy. Soft orange fur, plastic bead eyes. Such a simple thing. So important to his daughter. He pressed the fox to his chest and felt a wave of despair rising inside. Dark, suffocating. He, a systems architect, a man whose mind was valued for its ability to create reliable structures, had failed to protect his own family. His logic, his protocols, his flawless algorithms had proven useless. Daniel sank to the floor, back against the wall. Sat that way without moving until darkness fell outside the window. The apartment descended into twilight. He did not turn on lights, just sat in the darkness of his daughter's room, holding the forgotten fox, and felt the world he'd built over 10 years collapsing. About 3 hours later, he stood. His legs had gone numb. A pain shot through his back. Daniel left the nursery, walked to the kitchen, turned on the kettle automatically, took out a mug, put it back. He did not want anything to drink. He stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the perfectly clean countertops, at the spice jars arranged in order, and understood. His approach had failed. The system from above, through official channels, through bureaucrats and property management, was deaf. That meant he needed to search for truth from below, from those who knew the building from the inside. In his memory surfaced the image of the sullen superintendent Victor, an unfriendly man with a heavy gaze and perpetually slumped shoulders. Residents preferred to avoid him. Victor dodged conversations, answered in monosyllables, disappeared at the first opportunity. Daniel began reasoning logically. Victor had worked as facilities manager from the building's first day of occupancy. He could not have seen what happened during construction. His silence and surliness were either complicity or fear. Either way, Victor was the key. He saw. He knew. He needed to be made to talk. Victor's maintenance room was located on the first floor, next to the boiler room. Daniel descended the stairs, knocked on the door. Silence. Knocked harder. No answer. Tried the handle. Locked. He stood in the narrow corridor, thinking. Where could the superintendent have gone at 9 in the evening? Sudden intuition drew him toward the heavy metal door at the end of the corridor. A sign read, "Basement. Authorized personnel only." Daniel pulled the handle. The door yielded with a long, rusty screech. Beyond it, concrete steps descended, lit by a dim bulb in a wire cage. Daniel went down. Each step echoed. The air grew thicker, colder. Smelled of mold, rust, stagnant water. Below opened a space resembling the innards of a giant beast. The ceiling was tangled with pipes of varying diameters. From some dripped water, forming dark puddles on the concrete floor. The monotonous hum of the boiler room was audible. Daniel stopped, peering into the half-darkness. This descent was a metaphor. He had left the gleaming height of his 14th-floor apartment and plunged into the dirty, hidden underside of the building. Here, beneath layers of concrete and plaster, the truth was hiding. In the far corner of the basement flickered a weak light. Daniel moved toward it, circumventing puddles. The light came from behind an old, rusty shelving unit piled with junk. Buckets, pipe scraps, coils of wire. Daniel carefully looked around the edge of the shelving. Victor knelt on the floor, lighting his way with a flashlight. Beside him, on the floor, sat a worn canvas bag with bread and a carton of milk. He was arranging something in the dark corner where an old mattress could be seen, folded in half. The superintendent had not heard his approach, absorbed in his task. Daniel's suspicions instantly took shape. Victor was hiding stolen construction materials here, or documents, acceptance certificates, invoices, something incriminating against the developer. Evidence. Daniel felt a surge of adrenaline. He'd caught him. "Victor!" Daniel called out loudly, emerging from shadow. The superintendent flinched violently, as if shot, spun around sharply. His face in the flashlight beam contorted with a mixture of fear and rage. Eyes darted like a cornered animal's. "Who's there? What do you want?" His voice trembled. Daniel took a step forward, confident in his assumption. "I'm from apartment 142. Daniel Hayes. I need to have a serious talk with you." He tried to look behind the shelving, expecting to see bags of cement or folders of documents. Victor jumped to his feet, blocking the corner with his body. "What are you hiding here?" Daniel pressed, feeling like an investigator on the verge of breakthrough. "Materials that should have gone into our walls? Documents?" Victor remained silent, breathing heavily. Daniel tried to push aside the edge of the shelving. In that moment, Victor snapped. It happened lightning fast. The superintendent, short but stocky, with the desperation of a cornered man, grabbed Daniel by the shoulder, shoved him with unexpected animal force. Daniel, who had never in his life participated in a fight, lost his balance. His back struck the damp concrete wall. Pain flared between his shoulder blades. "None of your business," Victor snarled, looming over him, face twisted. "Get out of here. Now, you hear me?" Daniel tried to straighten, but Victor was already roughly shoving him toward the exit. Grabbed his sleeve, dragged him toward the stairs. Daniel stumbled, tried to break free. "You have no right," he began. But Victor was not listening. He was pushing Daniel up the steps like a bag of trash. Daniel tripped over the threshold, tumbled into the corridor, turned to say something. The heavy metal door slammed with a deafening clang. The sound rang in his ears. A moment later came the dry click of a lock. Victor had locked the door from inside. Daniel stood alone in the quiet first-floor corridor, rubbing his bruised shoulder. Victor's fury was too real, too desperate. This was not the anger of a criminal caught red-handed. This was panic, animal terror before something far greater than the discovery of evidence. Daniel leaned against the wall, breathing hard. What was there behind the shelving? What was Victor protecting with such desperation? That evening, as Daniel sat in the living room mindlessly scrolling through his phone, a quiet knock came at the door, almost inaudible. Daniel raised his head, listened. The knock repeated, 3 short raps. He stood, walked to the door, looked through the peephole. On the landing stood Victor. But this was a completely different person. Shoulders slumped, face exhausted. Eyes darting side to side, checking for witnesses. He wore a clean, though old, shirt. Hands gripped a crumpled baseball cap. Daniel opened the door. Victor flinched as if to flee, but remained standing. "Can I?" he whispered, glancing again at the stairwell. "We need to talk. I want to apologize." Daniel said nothing, studying him. An enemy does not look like this. Victor resembled a broken man. Daniel silently stepped back, allowing the superintendent inside. Victor entered, removed his boots, walked to the kitchen as if afraid to dirty the floor. Sat on the edge of a chair, holding the cap in his hands. Daniel sat opposite, turned on the kettle automatically. "Talk," he said. Victor remained silent, choosing words. Fingers kneaded the fabric of the cap. Finally, he raised his eyes. "The developer stopped paying my salary 6 months ago," he began quietly, faltering. "I stuck it out. Had a family to feed. Then I threatened to file a complaint with the labor board." He fell silent, ran a palm across his face. "And?" Daniel prompted. Victor sighed heavily. Two guys showed up, showed me a photograph of my son outside his school, explained that filing complaints was a bad idea, said the boy was so small, defenseless, that a lot could happen on the way home. His voice broke. Daniel felt ice spreading inside him. They forced me to sign all the acceptance certificates, Victor continued. Material deliveries I never even saw. For the inspection committee, they'd bring 1 truckload of decent brick, park it by the gate for show. Then at night, when nobody's around, 3 dump trucks full of construction debris would roll in. Broken brick, sand mixed with clay instead of proper mortar. I kept silent, protecting my son. Daniel listened, and the picture assembled itself. Criminal scheme, material substitution, witness blackmail, falsified documents. His building was constructed from lies held together by threats. But what were you hiding in the basement? He asked. Documents? Evidence against them? Victor smiled crookedly. A tear rolled down his unshaven cheek. Worse, he whispered. My family. My wife and first-grade son. Daniel froze. Victor continued, staring at the floor. As soon as I signed the last paper, they kicked me out from the maintenance room where we'd been living. Said they did not need me anymore. Gave me a week to clear out. Had nowhere to go. No money, no relatives in the city. I moved them down there, in the basement, behind the shelving. Put down a mattress, brought blankets. My son goes to school like nothing's wrong. My wife cries at night. Daniel's world inverted. Victor was not a villain. He was a victim driven to desperation. A man hiding his own family in a basement because the system had crushed him. Daniel looked at the superintendent and saw himself, just several steps further down the road to ruin. Why are you telling me this? He asked quietly. Victor raised his eyes. In them burned a strange mixture of shame and fury. Because we have the same enemy. They destroyed my life. They're destroying yours now, and hundreds of others like us. Somebody needs to stop them. He stood. He put on his cap. Morrison from the district office, he's in on it with the developer. Saw them together multiple times, passing money in envelopes. You think that's why he blew you off? Because silence serves him. Daniel walked Victor to the door. The superintendent stepped onto the landing, turned back. You cannot stand against the system alone, he said. But if you decide to fight, I'll help, however I can. The door closed. Daniel stood alone in the hallway. He understood with terrifying clarity. His real enemy was not the superintendent, was not the developer, was not even the bureaucrat. His enemy was this entire, merciless, rotten system. And to protect his family, he would have to learn to break the rules just as ruthlessly as they were being broken against him. Victor was already standing in the doorway, hand on the handle, when he froze, turned back. In the hallway's half-light, his face appeared gray and haggard. He grabbed Daniel's sleeve, pulling him closer. Eyes darted to the stairwell, checking for witnesses. Wait, he whispered hoarsely. Do not go to the city offices. They're all one gang. Daniel froze, absorbing every word. There's a state building inspectorate. They do not answer to these people. File directly with the state. Victor spoke quickly, stumbling over words. Find the statute about direct and clear threat to the life and health of minors. That's the only thing they fear like fire. Victor's fingers dug into Daniel's sleeve harder. Smell of tobacco and sweat. Voice trembling. File a complaint there. Attach photos of the bricks. Maybe somebody there will actually get off their rear end. Maybe. He released the sleeve, stepped back, looked Daniel in the eyes one last time. Good luck, and protect your family. The door behind him closed quietly. Daniel stood alone in the corridor, feeling something new igniting inside him. Not hope. A concrete algorithm. A path to solution in a world that seemed to have completely abandoned logic. All night, Daniel sat at his laptop. 11:30 p.m. on the clock. The screen glowed in the darkness of the empty apartment as the only light source. Coffee in his mug had long gone cold. Fingers flew across the keyboard, opening tab after tab. Official Legal Information Portal. Federal Statute 184. State regulations. He had plunged into his element, data search and analysis, structuring chaos. Here he was master. Each article, each clause arranged itself in his mind into an ordered system. There it was. Section 3, subsection 2. Upon identification of direct and clear threat to the life and health of minor citizens, the oversight body is obligated to... Daniel leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, inhaled, exhaled, opened a new document, began typing. The text emerged dry, businesslike, calibrated. No emotions, no complaints. Pure logic and facts. In apartment 142, a critical violation of building codes has been discovered. He described every detail meticulously. Date of crack appearance, defect dimensions, plaster collapse in immediate proximity to minor's sleeping area, daughter's health condition. Attached photographs, close-ups of broken brick, damp mortar, hole in wall. Referenced specific statute articles. At 4 a.m. he pressed Submit. The system issued an incoming reference number and automatic confirmation. Daniel stared at the screen, feeling forgotten satisfaction. He was acting by the rules again, but now at a different, higher level. Flanking maneuver. He had outmaneuvered the system using its own protocols. 3 days passed in tense silence. Daniel checked email hourly, refreshed the portal page, entering his reference number. Status did not change. Under review. The hope that had flared that night began to fade. He wandered the empty apartment like a ghost, unable to focus on work, on food, on anything. On the 4th day, at 10:30 in the morning, his phone came to life. An unfamiliar local number appeared on screen. Daniel grabbed the phone, heart beating faster. Mr. Hayes? A polite, almost ingratiating male voice came through the line. Young, educated. My name is Kevin. I'm the assistant to Richard Morrison. Daniel froze. Morrison. That same bureaucrat who had refused him the first time. Your complaint, forwarded to us from the state level, has been reviewed, Kevin continued. Mr. Morrison has personally taken control of the case. He would like to meet with you tomorrow at 2 p.m. to discuss options for a compromise resolution. His breath caught. Compromise. Personal control. Daniel gripped the phone tighter. Yes, I'll be there. What time? His voice sounded steadier than he expected. 2 p.m. Same office, 3rd floor. Mr. Morrison is expecting you. Brief pause. See you then, Mr. Hayes. Dial tone. Daniel slowly lowered the phone. The system had worked. His complaint had pierced the wall of indifference, State oversight had pressured Morrison, and he had yielded. For the first time in weeks, Daniel felt something resembling victory. He dialed Claire's number without hesitation. Long rings. She did not pick up for a while. Finally, a click. "Hello?" Voice tired, guarded. "Claire, I did it," the words burst out. "They called me to the administration. Morrison himself. They're talking about a compromise. State oversight forced them to move." Silence on the other end. Too long. Daniel felt something cold constricting inside. "Mia was coughing all night again," Claire finally said. Her voice was flat, lifeless. "She's running a fever. The doctor says it's looking like allergic bronchitis now. Her lungs have reacted to the constant irritation." Daniel closed his eyes. "Claire, Daniel, I'm tired of promises." She was not shouting. This was worse. "I am not coming back to that city until I have keys and documents in hand for a different, safe apartment. Not compromise. Not promises. Keys. I do not believe words anymore. Claire, give me a chance. You had your chance." Short beeps. She'd hung up. Daniel stood in the middle of the living room holding the phone, staring into emptiness. Victory had turned to ash. He did not just need to negotiate. He needed to return with concrete results. Otherwise, he'd lost his family forever. The next day, at exactly 1:45 p.m., Daniel entered the familiar monumental administration building. He wore his best shirt, white, perfectly pressed, had replaced jeans with dark dress slacks. In his hands, that same black binder, but now with new documents. Copies of the state complaint, medical certificate regarding Mia's condition, large color printouts of the brickwork photographs. He climbed the marble stairs, feeling different than last time. Not a supplicant, a negotiating party. State oversight was at his back like heavy artillery. Morrison had summoned him. This meant the bureaucrat was afraid. Fear of inspection had made him amenable. Daniel was prepared for constructive dialogue, for discussing timelines of independent inspection, for considering options with temporary relocation during repair period. He had compiled a list of demands, calibrated and reasonable. He believed in the possibility of reaching agreement. He was going to this meeting to reclaim not only justice, but his family. A young man met him on the third floor. Kevin turned out to be a thin guy, around 25, in a cheap suit with a nervous smile. Glasses in thin frames. Hands twitched as he extended them for a handshake. "Mr. Hayes? Please come in. Mr. Morrison is waiting." The voice sounded falsely cheerful. Daniel followed him down the corridor. Familiar door. Kevin knocked twice, opened it slightly. "Mr. Morrison? Daniel Hayes is here." He stepped aside, allowing Daniel to enter. Daniel crossed the threshold and froze. The office looked different. Morrison sat behind his massive desk, but was not looking at Daniel like a visitor, like prey. Lips stretched in a cold, predatory smirk. Eyes glittered with triumph. Against the wall to the right, arms crossed over their chests, stood two men. Crew cuts, bull necks, cheap dark suits bunching at the shoulders. Faces without a trace of emotion. Professional emptiness. Behind Daniel, the door closed. The click of the lock sounded deafening. Kevin had vanished. Daniel turned, tried to open it. Locked. He turned back to Morrison. The air in the office instantly became dense, heavy. All hope evaporated, as if someone had opened a valve. In its place, flooded, icy, viscous terror. This was not a negotiation. This was a trap. Morrison leaned back in his leather chair, fingers interlaced over his stomach. Silent, savoring the moment. Studied Daniel with the curiosity of an entomologist examining an insect under glass. It finally spoke. "Well then, troublemaker, you ridden yourself into a corner?" Voice lazily drew out the words. "You thought you were the smartest, going over our heads." Daniel gripped the binder tighter, remained silent. Morrison leaned forward, placing elbows on the desk. "In your little document, Mr. Hayes, you slandered respected individuals, cast aspersions on the work of an entire department." He spoke evenly, almost languidly. "And that, by the way, is a criminal offense. Dissemination of knowingly false information damaging honor, dignity, and business reputation. Do you even understand what you're facing?" The words fell into the office silence like hammer blows. Daniel opened his mouth to object, to say the complaint contained only facts, that there were photographs, medical certificates. But he understood the futility. Any words here were useless. This was not a trial. This was an execution. Morrison nodded. A short, barely perceptible movement of the head. That was enough. The two men moved simultaneously, as if on command. Everything happened fast, routine, and terrifying. One came from behind. Daniel felt strong hands on his shoulders. Professional movement, and his right arm was twisted behind his back. A flash of sharp pain pierced his shoulder. He cried out. The second approached from the front, wrenched the binder from Daniel's weakened fingers, shoved a hand into his jacket pocket, extracted his phone. Daniel, who had never fought in his life, instinctively tried to break free, jerked away. The pain in his shoulder exploded into stars before his eyes. They held him in a death grip. This was not just violence. This was ritual humiliation. A demonstration of absolute power. Morrison watched the proceedings calmly, indifferently. For him, this was routine. They dragged him toward the door. Daniel tried to brace his feet against the floor, but they simply hauled him like a sack. Heels skidded across the smooth parquet. Someone opened the door. They pulled him into the corridor. Daniel saw the faces of administration employees, a woman in a blue suit frozen with a folder in her hands, a middle-aged man averting his eyes, a young woman pressing her palm to her mouth, frightened, curious, but mostly indifferent. No one said a word. No one intervened. To them, he was a foreign element, a violator of unspoken rules. They dragged him past offices, past people who were supposed to serve the law, and everyone remained silent. They did not drag him to the main entrance, down a service stairwell, downward, narrow concrete steps smelling of dampness. Daniel stumbled, nearly fell. They roughly caught him, continued dragging. The world narrowed to the pain in his shoulder and the terror of simply being erased, like an error in code. Heavy metal door. Cold air struck his face. Interior courtyard. Gray walls. Dumpsters. Crooked fence. They led him through a narrow gate and threw him out. Daniel fell to his knees. The sidewalk was wet from recent rain, filthy. Pain exploded in his knees. He fell onto his palms, trying to maintain balance. Cold moisture seeped through the fabric of his slacks. One of the suits leaned down. The face came within inches of Daniel's. Smell of cheap cologne and tobacco. Eyes empty. Dead. "You come here again, or file even one more complaint anywhere else," he hissed through his teeth. "You'll come to us yourself and write a confession for mortgage fraud. We'll find something to pin on you." understand?" He did not wait for an answer. Distastefully brushed off his hands as if he'd touched something dirty, turned and went back through the gate. The lock clicked. Daniel knelt on all fours, breathing heavily. Tremors racked his body. Pain in his shoulder mixed with icy humiliation. The binder of evidence had vanished. His phone had vanished. He remained alone, crushed, on a filthy sidewalk in the backyard of the seat of power. He slowly, with difficulty, rose to his feet. Legs trembled. He leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath and suppress the panic. Dirt on his palms, wet stains on his knees. He looked like a homeless person, like refuse. Daniel circled the building, emerged onto the main street, raised his head, looked at the main entrance of the administration building. Massive columns, flag fluttering in the wind, symbol of authority and law. For him now, this was a symbol of lies. The doors swung open. Morrison stepped onto the entrance stairs. He calmly adjusted the collar of an expensive gray overcoat, pulled a cigarette from his pocket, lit it, looked toward the plaza, did not even glance where Daniel stood. For the bureaucrat, the incident was resolved, problem eliminated. He was master of this world. And Daniel was just trash that had been taken out, an insignificant obstacle that had been crushed and forgotten. A black, gleaming sedan pulled smoothly, soundlessly to the curb. Expensive car, tinted windows. Morrison stubbed out his cigarette on a receptacle, unhurriedly descended the steps, approached the vehicle. The rear door opened, but Morrison did not get in back. He circled the car, opened the front passenger door, sat beside the driver, as an equal, as a partner. The person behind the wheel turned his head to say something to Morrison. Profile, sleek, self-satisfied face. Daniel froze. Blood drained from his face. Behind the wheel sat the director of Horizon Property Services. That same one who had sent him the first cold dismissal. The one who had refused to acknowledge the defect. He sat beside the bureaucrat, laughing, slapping Morrison on the shoulder. Daniel stood on the sidewalk, dirty, humiliated, crushed, and watched this scene. His world collapsed completely. This was not just negligence, not just corruption. This was a syndicate, a single organism, bureaucrat and businessman, partners in crime. The car pulled away, smoothly merged into traffic, disappeared around a corner. Daniel remained alone on the plaza. Wind whipped his hair. Passers-by walked around him without looking at his face. He had tried to stand in their way, and they had simply erased him. Like an insect. Now he understood the full scope. He was not just a plaintiff. He was a dangerous witness, one they would eliminate. The taxi dropped him at his building entrance. Daniel paid with the last crumpled bills from his pocket. The driver looked at him with curiosity, dirty stains on knees, wrinkled shirt, vacant stare, but said nothing. The car drove off. Daniel stood alone in the deserted evening parking lot. He climbed to the 14th floor, opened the door. The apartment greeted him with deafening silence. The hum of the refrigerator. Nothing else. No Claire's voice, no patter of Mia's feet, and no meowing from Whiskers the cat, whom she'd taken with her. Emptiness pressed from all sides, filling his lungs instead of air. Daniel did not remove his shoes, did not take off his jacket. He walked 2 steps down the hallway and stopped. His legs gave out. He slowly sank to the floor, back against the cold wall. He sat with legs extended, staring into the emptiness before him. His shoulder ached with a dull, pulsing pain, but this pain was nothing compared to what was happening inside. Icy humiliation burned him from within, consuming the remnants of dignity. He'd been beaten, thrown out like garbage, his evidence taken. He had lost. His gaze fell on the wall opposite, a wedding photograph in a white frame. Daniel and Claire, young, happy, laughing. She in a white dress, he in a suit, both believing the world was just and the future predictable. The photograph seemed a bitter mockery, a greeting from another, impossible life. He had nothing left. No documents, no phone, no family beside him. Not even hope. Morrison had won. The system had crushed him like an insect. And worst of all, he had surrendered, accepted defeat, resigned himself to his daughter growing up without a father because he had proven too weak to protect her. The clock ticked on the wall. An hour passed. Daniel sat motionless, sunk in stupor. Thoughts circled, returning to one point. He had lost on all fronts. The logic he'd believed in had proven useless against a system built on lies and violence. Finally he rose, moved slowly, like an automaton, walked into the living room, to his desk, turned on the laptop. Blue screen light illuminated his face. He stared at the desktop littered with folders and files. His entire battle was here. Months of work, hundreds of hours, all useless. Daniel made a decision. Clear, cold, final. Delete everything. Burn this nightmare from his life. Start over with a clean slate. Forget the crack. Forget Morrison. Forget his stupid naivety. Return to who he was, a programmer who lives in a world where everything obeys rules. He opened the folder on his desktop. Name, issue, Wall Apartment 142. Inside, hundreds of files. Photographs of the crack from different angles, different dates. Excel spreadsheets with daily humidity measurements. Scans of dismissals from property management. Drafts of complaints nobody had read. Mia's medical certificates. This was a monument to his defeat. An archive of foolishness and belief in non-existent justice. Daniel selected the folder, held down Shift, deletion bypassing the recycle bin, permanent. Dragged the icon. A dialog box appeared. Are you sure you want to permanently delete these files? The cursor hovered over the Yes button. His finger trembled. Something inside stopped him. Wait. In this folder, among the legal debris, he kept several family videos. He had used them to reconstruct the timeline of events, establish dates. Videos with Mia. He could not delete them. This was all he had left. Memories of the time when they were happy. Daniel canceled the deletion, opened the folder, decided to go inside one last time to copy the family archive to an external drive. Farewell ritual. Attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. He scrolled through the file list, photographs, documents, spreadsheets, and there it was, a video file. Name, Mia. Birthday, 5 years. MP4. Mia's 5th birthday. A year ago, before the move, when everything was good. Daniel clicked the file. Windows Media Player opened, loaded the video. On screen appeared Mia, small, healthy, laughing. She sat before a castle-shaped cake with 5 candles burning. Claire helped her blow them out. Laughter, applause, joy. Daniel watched his daughter and felt a lump rising in his throat. This girl had been so alive. Now she coughed through nights, gasping for air. The frame changed. Now the three of them stood outside, against the backdrop of Horizon Towers under construction. Daniel remembered this moment. He'd filmed on his phone, proudly showing Mia where her window would be. Claire squinted in the sun, smiling. Mia stretched her hand upward, counting floors. Happy faces. Faith in the future. Daniel was ready to close the player, unable to watch anymore. But his gaze accidentally caught movement in the video's background. There, at the construction site entrance gates, stood two men. They were arguing about something, gesturing actively. Daniel frowned, paused the video, enlarged the image as much as the resolution allowed. Phone camera quality was not ideal, the picture grainy, but he could distinguish silhouettes. One man, large, in an expensive leather jacket. The second, shorter, in a light-colored overcoat. His heart skipped. Daniel zoomed the image even further. The large man, he'd seen that sleek face in the news. Director of Keystone Construction, the developer of their building. And the second, familiar posture, commanding gestures, expensive clothing. Daniel went cold. It was Morrison. Bureaucrat Morrison. A year before, Daniel had first come to him with a complaint. At the construction site, in private conversation with the developer. What were they arguing about? Why was a bureaucrat who was supposed to be inspecting the project standing here unofficially, without witnesses? Daniel broke into cold sweat. Hands trembled. He frantically right-clicked the file, selected Properties, stared at the line, Date created. The numbers seared his retina. March 14, 2024. March 14th. A memory flashed in his brain. Another document, the official state occupancy permit for their building. He remembered that date. It had haunted his nightmares the past weeks. Daniel rushed to the browser, opened email, typed in search, occupancy permit. Found an email from property management sent a month ago. Opened the attached scan. State occupancy permit for Horizon Towers residential complex. Signature of responsible party from city administration. Richard Morrison. Date of signing, certified with seal, March 15, 2024. Daniel leaned back in his chair, looked at two screens, video on the left, document on the right. March 14th. Morrison and the developer arguing at the construction site. March 15th. Morrison signing the occupancy permit, certifying the building was constructed with quality and safety. One day apart. What happened that day, the 14th? What were they arguing about? Negotiating? Morrison demanding his cut for turning a blind eye to defects? Or the developer threatening? Did not matter. What mattered was different. Daniel had proof of their connection. Proof dated the day before official occupancy. In that moment, something inside him clicked. Sharp, like a switch. Despair evaporated. Humiliation vanished. In their place came cold, ringing, mathematically precise rage. Pure as a line of code. Lethal as a critical vulnerability in a security system. He was no longer a victim. He was a hunter who had found the predator's weak point. He was not a naive petitioner playing by someone else's rules. He was a systems architect who had discovered a zero-day vulnerability in the enemy's defenses. And he knew how to exploit it. Daniel would not go to the police. They would lose this evidence. Documents would burn, the video would vanish, and he himself would be accused of slander or fabrication. He would strike himself. Direct. surgical, at the very heart of the system. He would operate not by their false laws, but by his own, the laws of information, pressure, and inevitable consequence. Daniel worked until dawn. Fingers flew across the keyboard. He was not writing complaints. He was creating a weapon. He opened video editing software, imported several files, began cutting, splicing, overlaying. He assembled a short clip, 45 seconds. The first 15, Mia running around her sunny room with peach-colored walls, laughing, jumping on the house-shaped bed, hugging Cooper. Music light, childlike, pure happiness. Hard cut. The next 15 seconds, a close-up of the black hole in the wall. The camera slowly pushes in on broken brick, damp mortar. On the audio track, Daniel overlaid recording of Mia's cough, dry, agonizing, wrenching. Music cuts off. Only the cough and silence remain. Finale. Freeze frame from the birthday video. Morrison and the developer standing together at the construction site gates. Image freezes. On screen slowly, letter by letter, white text appears. March 14th, 2024. One day before, successful state occupancy approval. Pause. Beside the frozen figures appears a scan of the March 15th certificate. Daniel reviewed the clip 3 times. Each time it hit harder. The contrast between the happy child and what they'd done to her was unbearable. And the final frame left no doubt. Morrison and the developer. Partners. Criminals. This was not a hint. This was an accusation. Morrison's official email would not work. Assistants checked it, filtered messages. He needed the personal address. Daniel opened the browser, began searching. Used professional skills accumulated over years working with data. Richard Morrison, date of birth, city. Within half an hour, he found it. Personal email account on a popular free service. Morrison had used it for forum registrations, online shopping, dating sites. Traces were everywhere. People always leave digital footprints. Always. Daniel created a new anonymous email through VPN, opened the message form. In the To field, entered the found address. In the subject field, wrote one word: algorithm. Message body, 1 sentence. Short, clear, ruthless. You have 24 hours to correct a system error. Otherwise, this file will be executed at the state prosecutor's office and on servers of all city media outlets. Daniel attached the video file, checked the address once more, hovered the cursor over the Send button, froze for a moment. This was the point of no return. After this, he would become not a victim, but a participant in their game. A blackmailer. A criminal in the eyes of the law. He pressed the button. The email flew into the network. Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. Message sent. Timer started. 24 hours. He did not go to sleep. Sat before the laptop, drank cold coffee, and waited. 2 hours passed. On an old flip phone Daniel had pulled from his desk drawer after his smartphone was stolen, an SMS arrived. Unknown number. Text. Call back. A minute later, a call. Daniel calmly pressed the green button, brought the phone to his ear. "What do you want, you piece of trash?" Morrison's voice hissed in the receiver, voice trembling. Beneath the fury was distinctly audible animal fear. Morrison had received the video. Morrison understood. "I need a new apartment for my family," Daniel said evenly, without emotion. "Safe, in a different neighborhood. Full documentation package. Tomorrow by noon." "Do you understand that this is blackmail?" A criminal offense? Morrison was gasping. Daniel smiled grimly. I understand that the video captures a bureaucrat accepting a bribe from a developer one day before signing occupancy approval for a building with critical violations. Enough criminal offenses there for an entire volume of the penal code. Your choice. How did you get— You have 22 hours, Daniel interrupted. Send the apartment address to this number. See you, Mr. Morrison. He hung up, sat in silence. Heart beat steadily, calmly. For the first time in months, he felt in control of the situation. The next day, at exactly 11:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. Daniel opened it. On the threshold stood Kevin, Morrison's assistant. Pale, sweating, eye twitching. He extended to Daniel a thick folder of dark faux leather. Did not meet his eyes. Daniel took the folder, opened it. Inside, occupancy permit, lease agreement with right to subsequent purchase, technical passport. Address, Lincoln Street, Building 12, Apartment 37, City Center. Solid brick building from the 90s, 3 bedrooms. Daniel methodically, page by page, checked every document. Seals in place, signatures, registration numbers, everything perfect. In the envelope lay 3 keys on a ring. He raised his eyes to Kevin. Tell Mr. Morrison that the system error has been corrected, he said. File deleted. Agreement fulfilled. Kevin nodded, turned, and nearly ran to the stairwell. Daniel closed the door, pressed the folder to his chest, exhaled. A week later, the apartment on Lincoln Street was flooded with light and filled with laughter. Mia, whose cough had nearly disappeared in the clean air of the new apartment, raced through the rooms, exploring every corner. Claire unpacked boxes, arranged her plant pots along windowsills. Whiskers, the cat, lay on a sunny windowsill, purring contentedly. Daniel sat at the table sorting cables to connect the computer. Claire approached from behind, wrapped her arms around his shoulders, pressed her cheek to his head, was silent for a minute, then quietly asked, But how? How did you manage this when it seemed everything was lost? Daniel did not answer immediately. Looked at the laptop screen where a new project opened in the code editor. Finally smiled. Every system needs a backup, he said, especially when it's crashed. He had simply found in his past that very backup file which allowed him to roll back the entire hostile system to the point of no return. Claire kissed the top of his head. Went to help Mia assemble a new building set. Daniel saved the file, closed the editor, looked out the window. The city spread below, not from the height of the 14th floor, but from the cozy 3rd. He no longer flew above the system. He had learned to move through it. And that made him stronger.